Hello everybody and welcome. Today we will talk about global employee benefits at a glance from the perspective that is written by Professor Joseph Martocchio, and this is chapter 12 of the textbook. If you recall the textbook entitled "The World is Flat" by Professor Thomas Friedman, you remember that he talks about how the current state of technology-driven globalization has actually resulted in a high level of interconnections among the various economies around the world. This means that the American employers will be increasingly required to do business with organizations and entities in other countries, while actually various underdeveloped parts of the world seems to have experienced tremendous economic, trade, and standard of living growth in the nations that are able to take advantage of this globalization. Additionally, the move from traditional manufacturing to knowledge and service-based employment also means that many jobs, as well as the markets, are more likely to be very dispersed in terms of its geography around the globe. As the need increases for companies to interact globally, human resource management professionals will have increased opportunities to develop employment practices for American employees in many foreign countries with foreign assignments, as well as to deal with indigenous employees in the parent companies' foreign offices around the globe. So while most employers may choose to offer attractive benefits that go above and beyond the minimum that's required by most host nations in order to attract and to retain the desired talent that they need, it is important to first know the basic legal requirements and the basic employment context and the minimum statutory employment standards of each host nation where the employer proposes to do business. So in this lecture, we will provide a glimpse of basically the wide variety of employment practices that exist around the world. Now, for each country, benefits issues including paid time off, protection programs, retirement, healthcare, and standout benefits in particular, regions will be highlighted, perhaps at an overview as a summary level. So I'll try to provide a brief discussion of certain governmental structures, norms, and historical events to help shed light on employee benefits at various countries. And obviously, the textbook does a very good job of giving you a lot more detail about each of these, so hopefully you've had a chance to read through the textbook and use it for your research and also application whenever you're in this position of being able to apply it. Let us look at North America. So North America is made up of, for the most part, Mexico, Canada, US, the three biggest players that you and I come in contact with on a regular basis, at least on our day-to-day living here. So all three countries are part of the trade bloc that we know as NAFTA that has been worked on since the 1990s when Bill Clinton's administration initiated the first draft of this, and also President Trump's administration, and also the President Trump's administration has worked with Canada and Mexico to provide some revisions and updates to NAFTA as well. So hopefully you're familiar with some of the changes or the basic requirements of NAFTA. Every HR professional should recognize the role of trade blocs, which is a group of countries that agree to reduce trade barriers between themselves, often by lowering tariffs and sometimes restricting non-participating countries from engaging in the trade relationships. Many of these trade blocs promote regional trade, and they create economic growth for participating countries, like in our case, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Some trade bloc agreements do include worker provisions, so this is why it's important for all human resource professionals and departments to actually understand them so we can effectively abide by the rules and policies stated there. Trade between the United States and the other two NAFTA partners has actually soared since the agreement entered into force back in the 1990s. Trade restrictions were removed from industries such as, for example, motor vehicle, automotive parts, computers, textiles, and agriculture, as well as removing investment restrictions among the three countries as a result of NAFTA. The labor side of NAFTA is the North American Agreement on Labor Cooperation, otherwise known as NAALC, which was created in order to promote cooperation between trade unions and social organizations in order to champion improved labor conditions in all partnering countries. So overall, NAFTA is reported as having been sort of good for Mexico, but also good for us here in the United States and also for Canada. Otherwise, none of the countries would want to sign on. In the case of Mexico, we've seen that they've actually experienced a fall in poverty rates and rise in real income as a result of trade agreement, more specifically NAFTA. Let us look a little bit more closer in terms of Canada. Canada is a constitutional monarchy, which is also a parliamentary democracy and a federation which is consisting of 10 different provinces in 3 territories. While Canada has actually enjoyed a trade surplus and balanced budgets for many, many years, recent concerns and debate have grown over the increasing cost of the publicly funded healthcare system within the Canadian cities and provinces. So the basic rule of Canadian law holds that labor and employment law fall within the exclusive jurisdiction of the provinces. Both individual and collective employment relationships are controlled at the provincial level, and federal legislation cannot override provincial laws. Even when an industry or employer primarily conducts business overseas, of course, with the exception of cases in which industries are expressly assigned to federal jurisdiction. The origins of the common law governing individual employment contracts are actually the English Statute of Laborers of 1562 that is mentioned in literature. And that statute actually established working hours and wages. So we're talking about almost 4 centuries ago, certain standards haven't been set. The statute was repealed in the early 19th century, but became part of the English common law and later part of the common law governing all the provinces except Quebec, who instead operates under the Civil Code of Quebec. Let us look at South America for a few minutes. According to the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook database, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile are the largest economies in South America, with Venezuela and Peru experiencing economic development as well. Of course, Venezuela has been experiencing a lot of economic turmoil along with some of the other countries, but they've been suffering obviously quite a bit over the last 4 or 5 years because of the challenges that they're facing internally. Argentina and Chile have the best human development index, or HDI, which is a comparative measure of life expectancy, literacy, and standard of living measure by the United Nations. Venezuela has large oil reserves, which have actually turned the nation into a very important player in world trade. Maybe that's why many countries, including the former Soviet Union and obviously us here in the United States, have an interest in their stability. The biggest trade bloc in South America used to be Mercosur, also called the Southern Common Market, which was comprised of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Venezuela as the main members of Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru as associate states. The second biggest trade bloc was the Andean Community of Nations, made up of Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela, and Chile. These 2 trade blocs merged as of a declaration which was signed on December 8 of 2004 at the 3rd South American Summit and formed one large trade bloc, which was known as the South American Community of Nations, that modeled itself after the European Union. So countries like Brazil and Argentina often comes up with American employers as we do more business with them, obviously. So it's good to know some of their cultural differences and also employment differences between us and them. And the textbook provides good literature actually on both nations. Let us look at Europe for a few minutes. The European Union is a unique international organization which aims at becoming an economic superpower while retaining quintessential European practices such as high level of employment, social welfare protection, and strong trade union. Under the laws of all member states, employers must provide employees with a written document about the terms of the employment contract in Europe. The concept of employment at will, which is very popular in most of our states here in the US, does not exist in the European Union. So the European Union makes use of directives and community legislations to ensure that some minimum standards are adopted by member states within the EU. All member states either have specific legislation or unfair dismissal or general civil code provisions that apply to termination of employment contracts. The European Union website actually reports that community labor laws was designed with the aim of ensuring that the creation of a single market did not result in a lowering of labor standards or distortions in competition. However, it has been increasingly called upon to play a key role in making it easier for the EU to adapt to evolving forms of work organization. Let us look briefly at Asia for a few minutes. As of 2016, China has had the largest economy in Asia, which is actually followed by India and Japan. Asia has several trade blocs, such as the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, the Asia-Europe Economic Meeting, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, just to name a few that has been listed in literature that you've been reading. After 7 years of negotiations, the final terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, were actually set in 2016, which is a trade agreement among 12 Pacific Rim countries. There's no unifying economic body in Asia, and we can examine a representative sample of the more developed in developing economies in Asia, mainly China, Japan, and India. A block of countries not examined here, but that deserve mention since considerable jobs are being outsourced there, are those in Southeast Asian region like Thailand, Vietnam, even Singapore, which has a fairly small population, but they are basically a hub for that region. Malaysia, Philippines, Cambodia, in Laos. All of them are experiencing an influx of foreign investment, but they're not even close to the countries like Japan, China, and India, simply because of their large populations in terms of their annual growth rates. Let us first talk about China for a few minutes. The People's Republic of China, or PRC, is actually a communist state characterized by fast-growing economy, which is shifting from a centrally planned system to a more market-oriented economy in today's environment. I've traveled to China over the last 5 to 6 years, perhaps at least 10 times, to give guest lectures and also to provide training for corporate managers there. And I've seen an enormous growth all over China. Of course, during the COVID-19 time periods, obviously, they've suffered just as we're suffering here in the United States. But nonetheless, they've had a very good growth over the last couple of decades. A key challenge has been sustaining adequate job growth for tens of millions of workers that are laid off from state-owned enterprises within China. So the People's Republic of China labor laws was established in 1995, resulting in a break from the traditional iron rice bowl system of employment, with a shift from state-owned enterprises to private ones in a move that has actually given rise to new employment relationship issues in China. Under the older welfare system, the workforce was considered the property of the state. And many benefits such as housing, medical, and retirement systems were payable directly by the state-owned enterprises to the employees. So with the introduction of the People's Republic of China's labor law, employment relationships are now defined by the individual contracts. Now let us look at Japan for a few minutes. Japan is a constitutional monarchy. The Japanese economy is characterized by government-industry cooperation, a very strong work ethic, and a mastery of high technology in many of their firms and organizations. A unique characteristic of the Japanese economy used to be the term known as keiritsu, which is basically the close-knit relationship among various manufacturers, suppliers, and distributors, which are representing a guarantee of a lifetime employment for a substantial portion of the urban labor force, a system that has now been eroded considerably. Employment relationships in Japan are based on the traditional notion of freedom of contract, and some basic provisions for individual employment are contained in their Civil Code of 1896. So it goes back over a century. However, the outdated Civil Code has actually been replaced, and there are currently numerous recent laws which have been enacted after the World War II, dealing with labor standards, things like unions, minimum wages, childcare and family leave, just to name a few, as well as employee benefit laws. Employment benefit laws in Japan do include various insurance schemes, participation in which is mandatory, with premium borne either solely by the employer or by a combination of the employer and the employees. Let us now talk about the other large country in South Asia, and that would be India. India is a democratic federal republic with a diverse economy ranging from traditional farming to high technology industries, including medicine. The Indian economy, however, is plagued with income disparity and developmental challenges that are very similar to China and some of the other East Asian countries like Thailand, like Vietnam, and Malaysia. Basic constitutional legislation governs employment relationships for all employees, which ensures equality of opportunity to public employment and the prohibition of child labor. The directive principle of state policy has actually statutes that affect various aspects of employment relationships, such as working conditions and participation in management. Some of the key employee benefits provided by employers in India happens to include provident funds, gratuities or bonuses, which apply to most employees, pension, either defined benefit or defined contribution, house, cars, loans, life insurance protection for dependents, health, disability benefits, medical benefits for employees and their family members, as well as leave encashment. The Employees Provident Fund Organization is one of the world's largest Social Security programs. Wide variations exist between the public and private sectors in India, with the Ministry of Labor in labor laws governing employment relationships in the public sector, and more employer discretion is allowed in the private sector. Let us now look at the African continent. According to the United Nations Human Development Report, the bottom 25 ranked nations in the world were all in Africa as of the last decade. One of the areas of economic success happens to be South Africa, as well as Botswana in the southern part of the African continent. Some comparable success is also being made by countries such as Ghana, Kenya, Cameroon, and most notably Nigeria, which actually has proven oil reserves as well as the highest population in Africa. And it is expected to boom economically, which you and I have seen over the last few years as well. Let us talk a little bit about South Africa. South Africa is a republic and one of the few relatively more developed countries in Africa. South Africa is a middle-income emerging market with an abundant supply of natural resources, well-developed financial, legal, communications, energy, and transport sectors, and it has a modern infrastructure. However, there is a noteworthy social disparity held over from the apartheid era with continued poverty and lack of economic empowerment among the minority or disadvantaged groups in South Africa. Labor rights in South Africa stem from the Constitution, and the newest legislation is actually the Labor Relations Act of 1995, under which there is no distinction between union and non-union employees. All employment relationships in South Africa are dealt with under this Labor Relations Act of 1995. And for example, the unfair labor practice as a term applies to individual employment contracts as opposed to the collective contracts that we have here in the US. So try to understand the various laws of different countries where you or your organization will be operating so you can design appropriate compensation and employee reward programs for them. As the world becomes increasingly global, many American workers are getting an opportunity to work in a foreign country. So it's important to understand the nature of the work environment and the benefits generally offered in a country as you are considering an offer to work abroad. For example, employment practices in both Brazil as well as in Argentina are heavily influenced by government regulations. Overall, the benefit requirements for offerings are similar, but Brazil's required time off is more generous, which requires employers to actually provide 30 paid vacation days each year. So that is much better than us here in the United States. Argentina requires 14 paid vacation days, but also has 12 national holidays. Brazil provides a social insurance program for workers that provides pension for retirement, among other benefits. Argentina also has a public pension system and public health benefits that the employer must contribute to, as well as the employee should be contributing to it. Argentina also provides a required life insurance program. Like most other countries, the government mandated benefits in these South American countries like Argentina or Brazil seems to be more generous in some ways than those that are required in the United States. Like most other countries, the government mandated benefits in the South American countries like Argentina and Brazil seems to be more generous in some ways than those that are required in the United States. Actually, the US does not require any paid time off for workers and only limited protection for unpaid leave taken for childbirth or medical reasons under the Family Medical Leave Act. So when we see that other countries offer sometimes lower salaries, keep in mind that their benefits might be much more generous. So we need to look at a total package and total rewards in order to compare things against other countries, more specifically against us here in the United States. While the US does have a good social security system that provides some pension benefits, we can see that the system is currently somewhat unstable due to political divide, and employers carry a heavier burden in providing retirement benefits. Overall, employers carry the primary financial responsibility to provide health insurance benefits for employees in the United States. In summary, we know that extensive variations exist in minimum standards regarding compensation and benefits around the globe. One striking difference between the United States and other countries is the less generous family leave benefits in the US and relatively fewer paid days off. Government in many other countries mandate paid time off, which reflects the importance of family and maybe friends and even religion. Most countries offer Social Security pensions, but in many cases these benefits are not lucrative necessarily. Some of the countries that we've discussed actually do offer comprehensive healthcare programs, and as is the case in the United States, we know that mounting costs are straining these systems. In many countries, employees are required to make larger contributions to help offset higher costs. So whenever you're considering a position in a foreign environment, or you're sending employees to a foreign environment, or you're recruiting talented employees for your foreign subsidiaries, do consider the local environment, the regional environment, in trying to offer competitive salaries and benefits that would actually attract talented employees to your workplace, as well as to retain them and to keep them highly motivated so they can be performing competitively compared to others in the industry. Good luck. And thank you for listening to these lectures, and I wish you the greatest success, and I hope to see you at the graduation ceremony. Good luck finishing the program.